Little was known of the tiny kingdom of Org, save that the forest of Trews lay within its boundaries, and to that, other nations felt, it was welcome. The people were unpleasant to look upon for the most part, and their bodies were stunted and strangely altered. Legend had it that they were the descendants of the doomed folk. Their rulers, it was said, were shaped like normal men insofar as their outward bodily appearance went, but their minds were warped more horribly than the limbs of their subjects. The inhabitants were few, and were generally scattered, ruled by their king from his citadel, which was also called Org. It was for the citadel that Elric and his companions rode, and as they did so, Elric explained how he planned to protect them all from the natives of Org. In the forest he had found a particular leaf, which, when used with certain invocations, which were harmless in that the invoker was in little danger of being harmed by the spirits he marshalled, would invest that person, and anyone else to whom he gave the drug distilled from the leaf, with temporary invulnerability. The spell somehow re-knitted the skin and flesh structure so that it could withstand any edge and almost any blow. Elric explained, in a rare, garrulous mood, how the drug and spell combined to achieve the effect, but his archaicisms and esoteric words meant little to the other two. They stopped an hour's ride from where Moonglum expected to find the citadel so that Elric could prepare the drug and invoke the spell. He worked swiftly over a small fire, using an alchemist's pestle and mortar, mixing the shredded leaf with a little water. As the brew bubbled on the fire, he drew peculiar runes on the ground, some of which were twisted into such alien forms that they seemed to disappear into a different dimension and reappear beyond it. Bone and blood and flesh and sinew, spell and spirit bind anew, potent potion work the life charm, keep its takers safe from harm. So Elric chanted as a small pink cloud formed in the air over the fire, wavered, reformed into a spiral shape, which curled downwards into the bowl. The brew spluttered and then was still. The albino sorcerer said, "An old boyhood spell, so simple I'd nearly forgotten it. The leaf for the potion grows only in Trews, and therefore it is rarely possible to perform." The brew, which had been liquid, had now solidified, and Elric broke it into small pellets. "Too much," he warned, "taken at one time, is poison, and yet the effect can last for several hours. Not always, though, but we must accept that small risk." He handed both of them a pellet, which they received dubiously. "Swallow them just before we reach the citadel," he told them, "or in the event of the men of Org finding us first." And then they mounted and rode on again. Some miles to the southeast of Trews, a blind man sang a grim song in his sleep, and so woke himself. They reached the brooding citadel of Elric at dusk. Guttural voices shouted at them from the battlements of the square-cut ancient dwelling place of the kings of Org. The thick rock oozed moisture and was corroded by lichen and sickly, mottled moss. The only entrance large enough for a mounted man to pass through was reached by a path almost a foot deep in evil-smelling black mud. "What's your business at the royal court of Guthrin the Mighty?" They could not see who asked the question. "We seek hospitality and an audience with your liege," called Moonglum cheerfully, successfully hiding his nervousness. "We bring important news to Org." A twisted face peered down from the battlements. "Enter strangers and be welcome," it said, unwelcomingly. The heavy wooden drawgate shifted upwards to allow them entrance, and the horses pushed their way slowly through the mud, and so into the courtyard of the citadel. Overhead, The grey sky was a racing field of black, tattered clouds which streamed towards the horizon as if to escape the horrid boundaries of Org and the disgusting forest of Trews. The courtyard was covered, though not so deeply, with the same foul mud as had impaired their progress to the citadel. It was full of heavy, unmoving shadow. On Elric's right, a flight of steps went up to an arched entrance which was hung, partially, with the same unhealthy lichen he had seen on the outer walls and also in the forest of Trews. Through this archway, brushing at the lichen with a pale, beringed hand, a tall man came and stood on the top step, regarding the visitors through heavy-lidded eyes. He was, in contrast to the others, handsome, with a massive leonine head, and long hair as white as Elric's, though the hair on the head of this great solid man was somewhat dirty, tangled and unbrushed. He was dressed in a heavy jerkin of quilted embossed leather, a yellow kilt which reached to his ankles, and he carried a wide-bladed dagger naked in his belt. He was older than Elric, aged between 40 and 50, and his powerful if somewhat decadent face was seamed and pockmarked. He stared at them in silence, and did not welcome them. Instead he signed to one of the battlement guards who caused the drawgate to be lowered. It came down with a crash, blocking off their way of escape. "Kill the men and keep the woman," said the massive man in a low monotone. Elric had heard dead men speak in that manner. As planned, Elric and Moonglum stood either side of Tsaritsania, and remained where they were, arms folded. Puzzled, shambling creatures came warily at them, their loose trousers dragging in the mud, their hands hidden by the long, shapeless sleeves of their filthy garments. They swung their cleavers. Elric felt a faint shock as the blade thudded onto his arm, but that was all. Moonglum's experience was similar. The men fell back, amazement and confusion on their bestial faces. The tall man's eyes widened. He put one ring-covered hand to his thick lips, chewing at a nail. "Our swords have no effect on them, King. They do not cut and they do not bleed. What are these folk?" Elric laughed theatrically. "We are not common folk, little human, be assured. We are the messengers of the gods, and come to your king with a message from our great masters. Do not worry, we shall not harm you, since we are in no danger of being harmed. Stand aside and make us welcome." Elric could see that King Guthrum was puzzled and not absolutely taken in by his words. Elric cursed to himself. He had measured their intelligence by those he had seen. This king, mad or not, was much more intelligent. He was going to be harder to deceive. He led the way up the steps towards glowering Guthrum. "Greetings, King Guthrum. The gods have at last returned to Org and wish you to know this." "Org has had no gods to worship for an eternity," said Guthrum hollowly, turning back into the citadel. "Why should we accept them now? You are impertinent, King. And you are audacious. How do I know you come from the gods?" He walked ahead of them, leading them through the low-roofed halls. "You saw that the swords of your subjects had no effect upon us." "True. I'll take that incident as proof for the moment. I suppose there must be a banquet in your honour. I shall order it. Be welcome, messengers." His words were ungracious, but it was virtually impossible to detect anything from Guthrum's tone, since the man's voice stayed at the same pitch. Elric pushed his heavy riding cloak back from his shoulders and said lightly, "We shall mention your kindness to our masters." The court was a place of gloomy halls and false laughter, and although Elric put many questions to Guthrum, the king would not answer them, or did so by means of ambiguous phrases which meant nothing. They were not given chambers wherein they could refresh themselves, but instead stood about for several hours in the main hall of the citadel. And Guthrum, while he was with them and not giving orders for the banquet, sat slumped on his throne and chewed at his nails, ignoring them. "Pleasant hospitality," whispered Moonglum. "Elric, how long will the effects of the drug last?" Sarrasinia had remained close to him. He put his arm around her shoulders. "I do not know. Not much longer, but it has served its purpose. I doubt if they will try to attack us a second time. However, be aware of other attempts, subtler ones, upon our lives." The main hall, which had a higher roof than the others and was completely surrounded by a gallery which ran around it well above the floor, fairly close to the room, was chilly and unwarmed. No fires burned in the several hearths which were open and let into the floor, and the walls dripped moisture and were undecorated. Damp, solid stone, time-worn and gaunt. There were not even rushes upon the floor, which was strewn with old bones and pieces of decaying food. "Hardly house-proud, are they?" commented Moonglum, looking around him with distaste and glancing at brooding Guthrum, who was seemingly oblivious of their presence. A servitor shambled into the hall and whispered a few words to the king. He nodded and arose, leaving the great hall. Soon men came in carrying benches and tables and began to place them about the hall. The banquet was at last due to commence, and the air had menace in it. The three visitors sat together on the right of the king, who had donned a richly jewelled chain of kingship, whilst his son and several pale-faced female members of the royal line sat on the left, unspeaking even among themselves. Prince Herd, a sullen-faced youth who seemed to bear a resentment against his father, picked at the unappetizing food which was served them all. He drank heavily of the wine, which had little flavour but was strong, fiery stuff, and this seemed to warm the company a little. "And what do the gods want of us poor folk at Org?" Herd said, staring hard at Sarrasinia with more than friendly interest. Elric answered, "They ask nothing of you but your recognition. In return they will, on occasions, help you." "That is all," Herd laughed. "That's more than those from the hill can offer, eh, father?" Guthrum turned his great head slowly to regard his son. "Yes," he murmured, and the words seemed to carry warning. Moonglum said, "The hill? What is that?" He got no reply. Instead, a high-pitched laugh came from the entrance of the great hall. A thin, gaunt man stood there, staring ahead with a fixed gaze. His features, though emaciated, strongly resembled Guthrum's. He carried a stringed instrument and plucked at the gut so that it wailed and moaned with melancholy insistence. Herd said savagely, "Look, father, 'tis blind Veercad, the minstrel, your brother. Shall he sing for us?" "Sing? Shall he sing songs, father?" Guthrum's mouth trembled and twisted, and he said after a moment, "He may entertain our guests with a heroic ballad if he wishes. But certain other songs he shall not sing," Herd grinned maliciously. He seemed to be tormenting his father deliberately in some way which Elric could not guess. Herd shouted at the blind man, "Come, Uncle Veercad, sing." "There are strangers present," said Veercad hollowly above the wail of his own music. "Strangers in Org." Herd giggled and drank more wine. Guthrum scowled and continued to tremble, gnawing at his nails. Elric crawled, "Would appreciate a song, minstrel." "Then you'll have the song of the three kings in darkness, strangers, and hear the ghastly story of the kings of Org." "No," shouted Guthrum, leaping from his place, but Veercad was already singing. "Three kings in darkness lie, Guthrum of Org and I, under a bleak and sunless sky, the third beneath the hill. When only the third arise, only when another dies. Stop! Guthrum got up in an obviously insane rage and stumbled across the table, trembling in terror, his face blanched, striking at the blind man, his brother. 2 blows and the minstrel fell, slumping to the floor and not moving. Take him out and do not let him enter again. The king shrieked and foam flecked his lips. Herd, sober for a moment, jumped across the table, scattering dishes and cups, and took his father's arm. Be calm, father, I have a new plan for our entertainment. You seek my throne. 'Twas you who goaded Virkad to sing his dreadful song. You know I cannot listen. He stared at the door. One day the legend shall be realized, and the Hill King shall come, and then shall I, you, and Elric perish. Father, Herd was smiling horribly, let the female visitor dance for us, a dance of the gods. What? Let the woman dance for us, father. Elric heard him. By now the drug must have worn off. He could not afford to show his hand by offering his companions further doses. He got to his feet. What sacrilege do you speak, Prince? Well, we have given you entertainment. It is the custom in Elric for our visitors to give us entertainment also. The hall was filled with menace. Elric regretted his plan to trick the men of Org, but there was nothing he could do. He had intended to exact tribute from them in the name of the gods, but obviously these madmen feared more immediate and tangible dangers than any the gods might represent. He had made a mistake, put the lives of his friends in danger as well as his own. What should he do? Sarazinia murmured, I have learned dances in Ilmiora where all ladies are taught the art. Let me dance for them. It might placate them and bedazzle them to make our work easier. Arioch knows our work is hard enough now. I was a fool to have conceived this plan. Very well, Sarazinia, dance for them, but with caution. He shouted at Herd, Our companion will dance for you to show you the beauty that the gods create. Then you must pay the tribute, for our masters grow impatient. The tribute? Guthrum looked up. You mentioned nothing of tribute. Well, your recognition of the gods must take the form of precious stones and metals, King Guthrum. I thought you to understand that. You seem more like common thieves than uncommon messengers, my friends. We are poor in Elric and have nothing to give away to charlatans. Beware of your words, King. Elric's clear voice echoed warningly through the hall. We'll see the dance and then judge the truth of what you've told us. Elric seated himself, grasped Sarazinia's hand beneath the table as she arose, giving her comfort. She walked gracefully and confidently into the centre of the hall, and there began to dance. Elric, who loved her, was amazed at her splendid grace and artistry. She danced the old, beautiful dances of Ilmiora, entrancing even the thick-skulled men of Org, and as she danced, a great golden guest cup was brought in. Herd leaned across his father and said to Elric, The guest cup, Lord, it is our custom that our guests drink from it in friendship. Elric nodded, annoyed at being disturbed in his watching of the wondrous dance, his eyes fixed on Sarazinia as she postured and glided. There was silence in the hall. Herd handed him the cup, and absently he put it to his lips, seeing the Sarazinia danced onto the table and began to weave along it to where Elric sat. As he took the first sip, Sarazinia cried out, and with her foot knocked the cup from his hand. The wine splashed on Guthrum and Herd, who half rose, startled. It was drugged, Elric. They drugged it. Herd lashed at her with his hand, striking her across the face. She fell from the table and lay moaning slightly on the filthy floor. Bitch! Would the messengers of the gods be harmed by a little drugged wine? Enraged, Elric pushed aside Guthrin and struck savagely at her so that the young man's mouth gushed blood. But the drug was already having effect. Guthrin shouted something, and Moonglum drew his sabre, glancing upwards. Elric was swaying. His senses were jumbled, and the scene had an unreal quality. He saw servants grasp Sarrasinia, but could not see how Moonglum was faring. He felt sick and dizzy, could hardly control his limbs. Summoning up his last remaining strength, Elric clubbed Herd down with one tremendous blow. Then he collapsed into unconsciousness.